Patrick DeHaan is joining us to get a little insight here on not just the commodity, but what's going on in the consumer activity space. He's the head of petroleum analysis at Gas Buddy. Patrick, good to see you. I know that here in Chicago, you and I can both see the same thing, which is not a lot of cars. So does that just mean that oil is going to keep dropping lower? I mean, when does it end?
Yeah, Oliver, obviously President Trump over the weekend extending those social distancing guidelines to April 30th, basically pushing off the soonest that we could see a return to normalcy on the road. So, as you mentioned, crude oil selling off after that news, not surprising because it's basically another nail in the coffin for oil prices and oil demand. And keep in mind, Saudis, Russia still haven't come to an agreement on any sort of production cut.
So when you hear the headline that the president is going to talk with Russia today, he said that to Fox News this morning. He's going to talk to Putin about oil. What do you think that's about?
Well, I think that's exactly what this is about. There's been some chatter that perhaps Canada, the U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia can come to a four-way agreement on how to shore up the price of oil. But the Saudis on Friday saying that they're not interested, at least for the time being, and that they're going to continue producing. I think this is eventually going to very much hurt the Saudis and Russians, but perhaps even more so the U.S. and Canada, who, at least in some places in Canada and the U.S., you're talking about single-digit prices for crude oil, and I'm sure the attention-grabbing untraded oil last week, the story was a Wyoming or Montana well that was selling briefly at negative prices.
So if there is, well, let me phrase it this way, Patrick. What's the sort of logic right now for some kind of deal? Is it the matter of time logic where, it's only a matter of time before these big oil producing nations come to a deal? Or is it a question of if they do it all?
I think it's a question of if they do it all. We really don't know if the Russians and the Saudis are really trying to derail the U.S. energy sector. I mean, of the four, Canada's the weakest, then the U.S. The Russians and Saudis perhaps have a little bit more resilience than we do when it comes to our private sector oil drillers, who are probably going to be struggling mightily over the next coming months. So we're in a weaker position, but we'll have to see if there's a deal.
All right. Right now, 20 to 50 cents. I'm looking at your notes that we can expect oil price to continue to drop more out west. This echoes a text I got from my mom yesterday, Patrick, where she's in Virginia, and she said, look how cheap oil is, and it's like $1.50 or whatever. And then from her mom in California, it's like $3.50. So is there a margin that needs to be filled here? I mean, what does regionality matter for gas prices if nobody's driving anywhere?
Yeah, regionality is still a huge factor. Now, you go to the West Coast, California is barely holding on to a $3 state average. But keep in mind that just before coronavirus hit, there were refinery issues in the West Coast that started to push stations higher. So kind of a higher platform they were starting at, and now they're starting to come back down. You have the state gasoline taxes that vary across the country. Virginia's low, California's high. And that's why motorists, if they do need to fill up, they should be shopping around, because there's still a huge spread north of here, Oliver, in Wisconsin, 95 cents a gallon in areas of Wisconsin. So you'll start to see a little bit more bunching over the weeks ahead as stations lower their prices, but there's a long way to go. Gas prices are still going to drop a significant amount.
Yeah. What's going to be what's least priced into this market right now, Patrick? Is it just the idea of some deal to cut production by the oil producing nations? Is it a spike in demand if there's a sooner than expected relief to the economy? What in your mind is this oil market really reflecting true potential supply demand dynamics, or is it over its skis like the stock market apparently was a week ago before it went on a 20% run? Because we've yet to see anything like that in crude. It's fascinating that stocks apparently got oversold like that, but crude oil, no.
Mm-hmm. I think we're waiting for any sort of catalyst, whether that's a deal between Russia and Saudi Arabia, or the U.S. cutting production, or some return to normalcy. I think crude oil is a little bit oversold, and that any catalyst could send prices a bit higher in the weeks ahead. But having said that, on the opposite side, you have oil inventories that are starting to fill up very quickly. There's talk about where are we going to put all this oil. Refined products are having a difficult time moving out of the marketplace. So there is a true threat on the supply side that we're becoming awash in oil And if there is a catalyst, I don't think we're going to go back up to $55 a barrel this year, just because there's such a mismatch right now that's been ongoing between supply and demand. Inventories are starting to rise rapidly, and that's going to keep prices from making a full recovery here throughout 2020.
Hey, one more for you, Patrick. One thing that we discuss a lot from the bond and stock market side, but particularly in bonds, is the high-yield energy space and the shale drillers here in the U.S., where I've got a lot of guests come on and say these companies are not going to make it to the other side of this drought. There's going to have to be consolidation, closures, bankruptcies, etc. Seems like that's going to be the case. As those start to formulate, does that mean that there will be less production coming from the U.S.? Will there be relief by virtue of just the drop in prices that disables some of these producers?
Well, I think that's the biggest question: is how much of a drop in demand are these the weakest producers that are going to go offline, that are producing just small amounts of crude oil, or these bigger producers that have more production under their belt? I mean, that's the biggest question. Is it going to be enough? If there are bankruptcies, is it going to off U.S. production enough to shore up the price for everyone else? And I don't think at this point there's going to be enough bankruptcies. I think there will be a lot of consolidation. But I think that will lend into a future agreement between the top four oil producers here in Canada, the U.S., Russia, and Saudi Arabia. I think there will be a deal. I don't know how soon it'll take us to get there. But the realization here is that all these oil producers are going to be, or are struggling already, will probably lend credit to a future deal.
Yeah. All right. Patrick DeHaan, appreciate you joining us. As always, great insight and knowledge of the oil space, joining us from Gas Buddy.